The rich heir insulted the single dad, then froze when he recognized the man's call sign. And in that split second, the man who mocked a broke father realized he'd just picked a fight with the one hero whose name his family swore would never be spoken aloud again. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn breeze swept through the parking lot of Willow Creek Veterans Community Center, rustling the golden leaves that lined the cracked asphalt. Eli Ward's weathered pickup truck rumbled to a stop near the main entrance, its engine ticking as it cooled in the crisp morning air. "Got everything, sweetheart?" Eli asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at his 8-year-old daughter. Maddie nodded, her dark curls bouncing as she double-checked her backpack. "Math homework, reading book, and my new colored pencils," she announced proudly. Eli's eyes crinkled with a gentle smile. The morning sun caught the silver at his temples, evidence of the years that had carved quiet wisdom into his face. "That's my organized girl." They climbed out of the truck, Maddie's small hand finding his calloused one as they walked toward the brick building. The center had become their second home since Maddie's mother passed, a place where healing happened in small, everyday moments. "Morning, Mr. Ward," called Mrs. Chen, one of the volunteer tutors, from the doorway. Her warm smile welcomed them inside the worn but well-kept community space. "Good morning," Eli replied with a respectful nod. He knelt down to Maddie's level, straightening her jacket collar. "Have a great morning, kiddo. Learn lots." "I will, Daddy." Maddie wrapped her arms around his neck in a quick hug before skipping off to join the other children gathering for morning tutoring. Eli watched her go, saying a silent prayer of thanks for this place and its people. The center had been a lifeline when he'd needed it most, offering childcare, support, and purpose when he'd felt lost after returning to civilian life. Heading back outside, Eli climbed into his truck to move it from the loading zone. The engine coughed once before turning over, a reminder that it needed work he couldn't quite afford yet. As he shifted into reverse, a sleek black luxury car came roaring into the lot, taking the corner too fast. The expensive vehicle pulled up sharply behind him, and a man in an immaculate suit emerged, his face twisted in obvious irritation. Eli recognized him immediately, Carter Langford, whose family name adorned half the buildings downtown. "Is there a reason you're blocking the reserved space?" Carter's voice cut through the morning quiet, sharp with entitlement. Eli put his truck in park and stepped out calmly. "Just moving it now, sir. Was dropping my daughter off for tutoring." "Well, some of us have actual business to conduct," Carter sneered, adjusting his designer watch. "We can't all spend our mornings living off charity." The words landed like a slap. Several veterans and volunteers who were arriving paused, tension crackling in the air. Eli felt heat rise in his chest, but years of military discipline held him steady. "Mr. Langford," he said evenly, "this center serves hundreds of veterans and their families. We're not looking for charity, just a chance to help each other up." Carter's lip curled. "Oh, spare me the Noble Poverty Act. If you people showed some responsibility instead of expecting handouts, maybe you wouldn't need places like this." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Eli squared his shoulders, standing straight but keeping his voice measured. "Service and sacrifice aren't about economic class, Mr. Langford. Neither is basic respect." "Don't lecture me about respect when you can't even follow simple parking rules," Carter spat. "Now move your vehicle before I have it towed." Eli simply nodded, his dignity a quiet rebuke to Carter's arrogance. He climbed back into his truck, carefully backing it out of the space while Carter watched with unconcealed disdain. As Eli parked in the far corner of the lot, he could see Carter storming toward the building's entrance, other veterans and volunteers giving him a wide berth. The man's expensive shoes clicked against the pavement, each step radiating contempt. Opening his truck's toolbox, Eli retrieved his well-worn tools, their handles smooth from years of use. The weight of them was familiar, grounding. He closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath of the autumn air. "Lord," he murmured, "grant me patience, and maybe grant that man some perspective." He shook his head slightly, then gathered his tools and headed back toward the building. The center's aging boilers needed attention, and that, at least, was something he knew how to fix. Eli's work boots echoed against the worn linoleum as he made his way down the maintenance hallway, his toolbox heavy in his calloused hands. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the faded motivational posters that lined the walls. His shoulders were still tense from the confrontation in the parking lot, But years of military service had taught him to compartmentalize. There were boilers that needed fixing, and that's what he would focus on. The sound of formal voices drifted from around the corner, the morning tour group no doubt. Eli recognized the clipped tones of board members, their polished shoes clicking against the floor. He'd learned to make himself scarce during these visits, knowing how uncomfortable some of the suits got around the charity cases, as that Langford fellow had so eloquently put it. As Eli passed the recreation room, a familiar voice called out, "Hey Sparrow, you got a minute?" It was Frank Martinez, one of the older vets who spent most mornings playing chess in the rec room. The nickname rolled off Frank's tongue with the easy familiarity of someone who'd served. "Little busy right now, Frank," Eli replied with a slight smile. "Boiler's acting up again." In the main hallway, Carter Langford stood with 3 board members, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He'd been nodding along to whatever statistics the facility manager was rattling off about operating costs when that single word cut through the air like a thunderclap. Sparrow. Carter's throat went dry. The portfolio slipped, nearly falling from his suddenly numb fingers. That name. He knew that name. How many nights had he spent poring over Noah's deployment journals after the funeral, trying to understand the brother he'd lost? The pages were filled with mentions of a pilot called Sparrow. "The best man I've ever known," Noah had written. "Sparrow got us out again. Don't know how he does it, but that's 12 lives he's saved this month alone." The fluorescent lights seemed too bright now. Carter's designer suit felt suffocating as he watched Eli disappear down the hallway. This couldn't be the same man. The hero his brother had written about with such reverence couldn't be the same person he'd just humiliated in the parking lot. But the evidence was right there, the way the other veterans treated him with such natural respect. The quiet authority in his bearing that Carter had mistaken for defiance. The calm dignity in the face of Carter's own shameful behavior. "Mr. Langford?" One of the board members touched his elbow. "Are you all right? You've gone quite pale." Carter blinked, trying to focus on the concerned faces around him. His voice cracked. "Excuse me for a moment. I need some air." He broke away from the group, his expensive shoes carrying him down the hallway on autopilot. His mind was racing, replaying the parking lot scene with horrifying clarity. He'd sneered at this man, thrown his privilege in his face, all while standing in the very center Noah had loved so much. Through an open door, Carter caught sight of Eli kneeling beneath a sink, his tools spread out methodically beside him. The veteran worked with quiet efficiency, those same hands that had once guided aircraft through war zones now fixing pipes so children like his daughter would have running water for art classes. Carter pressed his back against the cool concrete wall, out of sight. "Sparrow," he whispered, the word barely a breath. "It can't be him." His brother's words echoed in his head. "Sparrow sees the good in everyone. Even when we're at our worst, he treats us with dignity. Reminds me of what we're fighting for." Carter closed his eyes, shame burning in his chest. In one thoughtless moment, he'd managed to dishonor everything his brother had believed in. A door clicked open nearby, and Carter startled. He needed air, needed to think, needed to figure out how he could possibly make this right. He pushed away from the wall, heading for the nearest exit, leaving behind the man his brother had called hero, the man he had treated like dirt. The morning sun still shone outside, though it felt dimmer now. Carter loosened his tie, struggling to breathe past the knot of regret in his throat. Through the window, he could still see Eli working, unaware of the profound impact he'd had on the Langford family, unaware that the man who'd insulted him was the brother of a soldier whose life he'd touched so deeply. The community center's kitchen stretched before Eli like a battlefield of broken appliances and failing infrastructure. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across the aging linoleum floor that had seen better days decades ago. The tiles were cracked in places, their original pattern barely visible beneath years of scuff marks and worn patches. Steam hissed angrily from a loose pipe connection beneath the industrial sink, and the sharp, metallic clang of Eli's wrench echoed through the cavernous space like gunfire in an empty hangar. The air itself told stories. Layers of industrial cleaner couldn't quite mask the musty smell of old pipes and decades of use. Grease stains on the walls spoke of countless meals prepared for veterans who had nowhere else to go, while the scratched surfaces of every counter bore witness to the center's vital role in the community. Eli heard expensive leather shoes clicking against the linoleum, approaching with the measured pace of someone trying to appear casual, but failing. He kept his focus trained on the stubborn pipe fitting, his calloused fingers working the threading with the patience of a man who'd learned that rushing any repair, whether on aircraft engines or kitchen plumbing, only meant doing the job twice. The connection was stripped worse than he'd initially thought, requiring delicate coaxing rather than brute force. "Excuse me," came a hesitant voice, cultured and careful. "Mr. Ward?" Eli's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his movements remained steady and controlled. He recognized that polished tone immediately. Carter Langford, the same voice that had cut through him like a blade in the parking lot, dripping with condescension and privilege. His grip on the wrench stayed firm, but he didn't allow his emotions to affect his work. Years of military discipline had taught him to compartmentalize, to function, even when everything inside him wanted to react. "Just a minute," Eli replied, his voice slightly muffled from inside the cabinet. The confined space reminded him of crawling through aircraft maintenance bays, though the stakes here were considerably lower. He finished tightening the connection with precise movements, testing it once more before sliding out from under the sink. His knees protested, a reminder that he wasn't the young airman he'd once been. Grabbing a worn shop rag from his tool belt, Eli wiped his hands methodically, each finger cleaned with the same attention to detail he'd once given to pre-flight checks. When he finally looked up, Carter Langford stood awkwardly in the kitchen doorway like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. The Heir's expensive charcoal suit looked absurdly out of place among the center's worn equipment and practical functionality. His Italian leather shoes probably cost more than some of the veterans here saw in a month. Carter shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his usual corporate confidence nowhere to be found. "Nice day," he offered weakly, the words hanging in the air like a question mark. Eli straightened to his full height, noting how Carter's gaze seemed to take in everything: the patches on Eli's work shirt, the practical steel-toed boots, the genuine dirt under fingernails that came from honest labor. "Something I can help you with, Mr. Langford?" His tone was professional, but maintained the temperature of a winter morning, polite enough to avoid rudeness, but offering no warmth. Carter cleared his throat, the sound echoing slightly in the empty kitchen. "About earlier? In the parking lot?" He paused, his jaw working as if the words were physically difficult to produce. His hands moved restlessly at his sides, betraying an inner turmoil that his carefully composed expression tried to hide. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior. It was inappropriate." The understatement hung between them like smoke, inappropriate, as if public humiliation and class-based ridicule could be dismissed with corporate euphemisms. "Appreciate that," Eli responded, his voice measured and neutral. He neither accepted nor rejected the apology outright, simply acknowledged its existence. In his experience, wealthy men often offered words they didn't mean to assuage their own guilt, rather than make genuine amends. "Actually," Carter continued, reaching into his jacket's inner pocket with the nervous energy of someone unused to being the supplicant, "I'd like to make it right. The center could use some new equipment, I'm sure." He produced an elegant checkbook, the leather cover bearing his monogrammed initials in gold leaf. "Whatever you need, new pipes, better tools, updated appliances." Eli held up a weathered hand, palm forward, stopping the offer before it could fully form. "That's not necessary, sir." "Please, I insist," Carter pressed, his voice taking on the practiced persuasion of boardroom negotiations. "It's the least I can do. I have resources, and this place clearly needs—" "Mr. Langford," Eli said, standing straighter and squaring his shoulders. Though his voice remained calm and controlled, there was unmistakable steel beneath the surface, the kind of quiet authority that came from years of leading men in life-or-death situations. "The people here don't need your pity. What they need is respect." Carter's carefully composed facade cracked, color rising in his cheeks like a schoolboy caught in a lie. He fumbled with the checkbook, tucking it away as if it had suddenly become radioactive. "I didn't mean to suggest. That is, I wasn't trying to imply that they were—" "Money doesn't fix everything," Eli said quietly, his words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. He picked up his wrench, the tool fitting his palm like an old friend, and began organizing his toolbox with methodical precision. Each instrument had its place, just as every word had its weight. These veterans, they've given everything for their country. They've sacrificed pieces of themselves, their health, their peace of mind. They deserve dignity, not handouts offered from guilt or obligation. An uncomfortable silence settled over the kitchen like dust after an explosion. The fluorescent lights continued their electric hum, and somewhere in the distance, the building's old ventilation system wheezed and rattled. Carter seemed to be wrestling with something internal, his normally confident corporate demeanor fracturing around the edges like ice under spring sun. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and his gaze drifted around the room as if searching for answers in the worn surfaces and practical equipment. "I couldn't help but overhear earlier," Carter said finally, his voice softer than before, almost tentative. There was something different in his tone now, not the practiced politeness of business dealings, but genuine curiosity, tinged with something that might have been hope. "Someone called you Sparrow?" Eli's movements slowed for just a fraction of a second, his hand pausing over his toolbox before he continued organizing with deliberate calm. The call sign was a door to a past he kept carefully locked, memories that belonged to a different man in a different world. "That was a long time ago," he said simply. "Were you stationed in the Middle East? Around 2015? Carter's voice carried an urgency that hadn't been there moments before, as if the answer mattered more than mere curiosity would explain. Eli closed his toolbox with measured precision, the metallic click echoing with finality. He turned to face Carter fully, his expression remaining courteous but firm. "Mr. Langford, I appreciate you coming to apologize, but my service record isn't something I discuss with civilians." The words weren't harsh, but they carried the unmistakable tone of a boundary being established. Carter opened his mouth to press further, leaning forward slightly, as if proximity might somehow bridge the gap between them. But something in Eli's expression, a quiet strength that spoke of lines that wouldn't be crossed, made him stop. The tension in the room was palpable, electric with unspoken questions and carefully guarded secrets. Carter clearly burned with inquiries he couldn't voice, while Eli's careful politeness served as an impenetrable barrier against further intrusion into memories that belonged to him alone. Eli glanced at his watch, a practical, military-issued timepiece that had survived more deployments than most soldiers, and began gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. "If you'll excuse me, I need to pick up my daughter for her lunch break soon. She's been looking forward to sharing her morning art project with me." The mention of Maddie seemed to strike Carter like a physical blow, his face tightening with what might have been shame or regret. He likely remembered exactly how the bright, innocent child had witnessed his earlier display of privilege and prejudice. The little girl's disappointment had been written clearly across her expressive face, and apparently that memory cut deeper than Carter wanted to admit. He nodded stiffly and stepped back from the doorway, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum. "Of course, I won't keep you from your daughter." Eli tested the repaired pipe connection one final time, running water and watching for any signs of leakage. Satisfied with his work, he wiped his hands clean on the shop rag, the familiar ritual providing a moment of normalcy in an otherwise surreal morning. The confrontation from the parking lot still hung between them like smoke from a distant fire, acknowledged but unresolved, despite Carter's attempted apology. As Carter turned to leave, his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been there when he'd arrived, as if their brief conversation had somehow changed the very air he breathed. The community center's cafeteria buzzed with the quiet hum of lunchtime conversation. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the worn tables where veterans and volunteers gathered for their midday meal. Eli sat across from Maddie, watching as she carefully unwrapped her sandwich from its brown paper bag. "Did Miss Thompson like your drawing today?" he asked, reaching over to help her with a stubborn juice box straw. "Uh-huh," Maddie nodded enthusiastically, her dark ponytail bouncing. "She said my clouds looked just like cotton candy." She took a big bite of her sandwich, then pointed to a colorful paper tucked in her backpack. "Want to see?" From across the room, Carter Langford stood in the doorway, his fingers absently adjusting his tie. He'd been walking the halls for the past hour, trying to shake off the morning's revelation about Eli's identity as Sparrow. Every attempt to make things right had fallen flat, leaving him feeling more lost than before. He watched father and daughter share their simple lunch, noting how Eli's stern expression softened when Maddie spoke. The scene stirred something in Carter's chest, a memory of similar lunches with Noah years ago before deployment changed everything. Maddie glanced up, catching Carter's eye. Before Eli could stop her, she hopped down from her chair and trotted over to where Carter stood. Her small hand reached out, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Excuse me, Mr. Langford." Her voice was soft but clear, her eyes bright with curiosity. Carter crouched down to her level, surprised by her boldness. "Yes?" "My mommy told me something before she went to heaven," Maddie said, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "She said a rich Langford helped save my daddy's life once. Was that you?" The cafeteria seemed to grow quieter. Carter's throat tightened as he saw Eli rise from his seat, tension visible in his shoulders. "What else did your mommy tell you about that?" Carter asked carefully, his heart pounding. "She said Daddy's whole squad needed help during a big rescue." Maddie's face scrunched in concentration as she recalled the details. "And someone with lots of money made sure they got home safe. Someone named Langford." Carter's hands trembled slightly as the pieces fell into place. Noah had been involved in coordinating emergency extractions, using family connections to expedite rescue operations. The timing would have matched perfectly. "No, sweetheart," Carter said gently. "It wasn't me. It was my brother, Noah." Eli had walked over, placing a protective hand on Maddie's shoulder. His expression was guarded, but there was something else there too, a flicker of recognition at Noah's name. "Maddie," Eli said quietly, "why don't you go finish your lunch?" She looked between the two men, sensing the weight of the moment but not understanding it. "Okay, Daddy." She gave Carter a small wave before returning to her seat. Carter stood, meeting Eli's eyes. "I didn't know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "About you being Sparrow, about Noah's involvement with your squad. I've been an absolute fool." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Eli studied Carter's face. The morning's arrogant businessman was gone, replaced by someone struggling with genuine remorse. "Your brother was a good man," Eli finally said, his words careful and measured. "He never mentioned his last name during deployment, just said he had connections that could help when things got bad." Carter nodded, swallowing hard. "Noah was the best of us. He saw value in people that He paused, glancing at Maddie, who was watching them while munching her sandwich. "That I've been too blind to see." "Mr. Langford," Eli started, but Carter cut him off. "Please, just Carter." His voice cracked slightly. "I know an apology doesn't begin to cover my behavior this morning, but I am truly, deeply sorry." Eli gave a slight nod, his posture relaxing just barely. The gesture wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, a small crack in the wall between them. The lunch period was ending. Veterans began clearing their tables, and volunteers emerged from the kitchen to clean up. Eli checked his watch and called to Maddie. "Time to head out, kiddo." Maddie gathered her things, carefully tucking her drawing into her backpack. She smiled at Carter one more time before taking her father's hand. Carter watched as they walked toward the exit, Maddie chattering about her afternoon plans while Eli listened attentively. The sight of them heading to Eli's old pickup truck stirred a deep ache in his chest, guilt for his earlier behavior, curiosity about the full story of Noah's connection to Sparrow, and a growing awareness of just how wrong he'd been about this place and its people. Through the cafeteria windows, he could see Eli helping Maddie into the truck, checking her seatbelt with practiced care. The weight of the morning's revelations pressed down on Carter's shoulders as he stood alone in the emptying cafeteria, watching father and daughter drive away. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Eli's pickup truck rumbled into the community center's parking lot. The early morning air felt crisp against his face as he climbed out, tool belt slung over his shoulder. The building stood quiet and peaceful, waiting for another day of service to begin. Inside, the hallway still held the lingering smell of yesterday's coffee and floor cleaner. Eli's boots echoed against the linoleum as he made his way to Director Thompson's office. They needed to discuss the aging boiler system and some electrical issues before the daily rush of visitors began. "Come in, Eli," Thompson called when he knocked. The director, a gray-haired veteran himself, sat behind a desk cluttered with manila folders and grant applications. "Thanks for coming in early. We need to—" The door burst open with a bang that made them both jump. Carter Langford stood in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His tie hung loose and his face was pale. In his trembling hands, he clutched a stack of papers. "I just found out," Carter said, his voice rough. "I've been up all night reading these documents. The demolition order, it's already been approved. 30 days. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eli's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What demolition order?" Director Thompson asked, rising from his chair. Carter stepped forward, spreading the papers across the desk. "The board's urban renewal initiative. They're planning to level this entire block. The community center, everything. It's all scheduled for demolition in 30 days. Eli's chest tightened. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I wish it was," Carter said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I signed off on these policies months ago. I didn't read the details. I didn't know." "You didn't know." Eli's voice came out low and dangerous. "You show up here, act sorry about insulting me, and now this? Was your apology just to soften the blow?" "No!" Carter protested. "I had no idea this place was on the list. I came as soon as I found out. We have to stop this." Director Thompson picked up one of the documents, adjusting his reading glasses. His weathered face grew grave as he studied the official letterhead and signatures. "This is legitimate. Corporate acquisition, scheduled demolition. It's all here." Eli's mind raced to Maddie, to the dozens of veterans who depended on this place, to the families who couldn't afford childcare anywhere else. How many people know about this? "Just the board and upper management, as far as I can tell," Carter said. "They kept it quiet to avoid protests." "Of course they did." Eli's voice dripped with bitterness. "And you're part of that board, aren't you, Mr. Langford?" Carter flinched at the formal address. "Technically, yes, but—" "Then don't pretend you're not responsible." Eli turned to Director Thompson. "What are our options?" The director shook his head slowly. "Without major funding or legal intervention, I don't see how we can fight this. The paperwork's ironclad." "I'll help," Carter insisted. "I can talk to the board, make them understand what this place means to the community." Eli laughed without humor. "Like you understood before you signed those papers? This isn't about your guilt, Mr. Langford. These are people's lives you're playing with." The morning sun now streamed through the office windows, casting long shadows across the damning documents on the desk. Outside, they could hear the first cars pulling into the parking lot. Families arriving for morning programs, veterans coming for support groups, all of them unaware their sanctuary was marked for destruction. "I need some air," Eli muttered. He pushed past Carter and strode down the hallway, ignoring the calls behind him. Outside, the spring morning had fully bloomed. A young mother helped her children out of a minivan, their backpacks bouncing as they raced toward the entrance. An elderly veteran slowly made his way up the wheelchair ramp, where he would soon join his weekly PTSD support group. Two teenagers headed for the tutoring center, laughing about something on their phones. Eli watched them all, his heart heavy with knowledge they didn't yet have. This place had saved him when he returned from deployment, lost and struggling to raise Maddie alone. It had given his daughter a safe place to grow while he rebuilt their lives. Now, it would all be gone in 30 days, demolished by people who had never set foot inside, never seen the lives it transformed. A car door slammed nearby. Eli turned to see Miss Rodriguez arriving with her 3 kids. She waved cheerfully like she did every morning, grateful for the center's free breakfast program that helped her make ends meet. Her youngest daughter spotted Eli and ran over to show him a drawing she'd made. "Look, Mr. Ward, it's for the art wall." Eli forced a smile, kneeling down to admire the crayon masterpiece. "It's beautiful, Sophie. Why don't you go put it up right now?" The girl beamed and skipped inside, her mother calling out reminders about homework. Eli watched them go, wondering how he would tell them, how any of them would manage without this place that had become so much more than just a building. The morning air no longer felt crisp and promising. Instead, it seemed to press down on his shoulders like a weight, heavy with the burden of uncertain futures and broken promises. More families continued to arrive, unaware that every minute that passed brought them closer to losing their sanctuary. Eli sat on the weathered park bench, watching Maddie chase butterflies near the playground. Her laughter carried across the afternoon air, but it couldn't lift the heavy weight in his chest. The community center had become their lifeline after Sarah's passing, free tutoring for Maddie, a support network of fellow veterans for him, and most importantly, a place where they both felt like they belonged. He rubbed his temples, trying to ward off a growing headache. 30 days. In 30 days, it would all be gone. The thought of telling Maddie made his stomach twist. "Mr. Ward?" Eli looked up to find Carter Langford standing a few feet away, his expensive suit jacket draped over one arm. The corporate air looked different now, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like genuine concern. "What do you want, Mr. Langford?" Eli kept his voice level, conscious of Maddie playing nearby. Carter shifted his weight, then gestured to the bench. "May I?" Eli nodded stiffly, sliding over to make room. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, watching Maddie chase a yellow butterfly through patches of dandelions. "I came to tell you I'm going to fight this," Carter said finally, his voice firm. "The demolition plan, I'm going to do everything in my power to stop it. With all due respect, Mr. Langford, your power is what got us into this mess." Eli's words came out sharper than intended. Carter winced but didn't argue. "You're right. I signed off on too many things without reading them, without considering the consequences. I was—" He paused, searching for words. "Disconnected from reality. But I'm asking for a chance to make it right." "How?" Eli turned to face him directly. You said yourself the board can overrule you. They can, Carter admitted. I only own 15% of voting shares, but I have connections, resources. I can rally community support, bring media attention to what the center means to veterans and their families. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need to try. Before Eli could respond, Maddie skipped over, her cheeks flushed from running. Hi, Mr. Langford. She smiled brightly, then noticed the serious expressions on both men's faces. Is everything okay, Daddy? Eli forced a smile. We're just talking about grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Maddie's eyes darted between them, showing that remarkable perception that sometimes made Eli forget she was only 8. Is this about the center? Miss Rivera was crying in her office today? Eli's heart clenched. He hadn't realized the news was already spreading. Daddy? Maddie's voice grew smaller. Are they really going to close our center? Carter straightened up, his expression pained. Not if I can help it, Maddie. I'm trying to convince your father to let me help fight for it. Maddie turned to Eli, her eyes wide and earnest. Daddy, can't we give people second chances? Isn't that what you always tell me? The words hit Eli like a physical blow. He'd said those exact words to her countless times, usually after playground disputes or when she struggled to forgive herself for making mistakes. Now here she was, throwing his own wisdom back at him. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She had Sarah's eyes, warm and full of compassion. What would Sarah say about this situation? She'd probably tell him to swallow his pride and accept help where it was offered, especially when Maddie's well-being was at stake. Eli took a deep breath, then turned to Carter. All right, Mr. Langford, you want to help? These are my terms. No more pity, no more half-truths, and absolutely no empty promises, especially not to my daughter. Carter nodded solemnly. You have my word. And one more thing, Eli added. Whatever plan you come up with, you run it by me first. These people at the center, they're family. I won't have them used as props in some corporate PR stunt. Understood completely, Carter agreed. I'll start making calls tonight, see what options we have. Would it be all right if I stop by the center tomorrow morning to discuss strategies? Eli checked his watch, nearly dinner time. The sun was already starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the playground equipment in long shadows. I'll be there at 7, doing maintenance checks on the heating system. 7 it is! Carter stood, brushing off his slacks. He looked down at Maddie and managed a small smile. Thank you for reminding us about second chances, Miss Ward. Maddie beamed at him, then tugged on Eli's sleeve. Can we get pizza for dinner, Daddy? Please? Not tonight, sweetheart. We've got leftover casserole waiting at home. Eli stood, gathering their things. Say goodbye to Mr. Langford. Bye, Mr. Langford, Maddie waved enthusiastically. See you tomorrow. As Eli walked with Maddie toward their truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something much bigger than a simple real estate dispute. The setting sun cast their shadows long across the parking lot, and he wondered if he was making the right choice, trusting a man who, just yesterday, had treated them with such contempt. But looking down at Maddie, skipping along beside him and humming to herself, he knew he had to try. For her, for the other families who depended on the center, for the promise he'd made to Sarah to give their daughter the best life possible. Whatever battle lay ahead, he would face it. He just hoped Carter Langford was truly ready to fight alongside them. The morning sun filtered through Eli's modest kitchen window as he stirred a pot of oatmeal. Steam rose in gentle wisps while Maddie sat at their small table, swinging her legs and drawing in her sketchbook. Can I have brown sugar on top, Dad? She asked, not looking up from her artwork. Already ahead of you, sweetheart. Eli sprinkled the sugar over her bowl and added fresh strawberries from their tiny garden. The biscuits in the oven filled the kitchen with a warm, comforting aroma. It was their morning ritual, simple but steady, just like everything else in their lives. After dropping Maddie at school, Eli pulled into the community center's parking lot. His old truck groaned as he cut the engine. The familiar sight of the brick building brought a mix of comfort and worry. Knowing its days were numbered made his chest tight. He was unlocking the front door when a sleek black car pulled up. Eli's jaw clenched as Carter Langford stepped out. But something was different. Instead of his usual tailored suit, Carter wore jeans, work boots, and a plain blue shirt. Morning, Carter said, shifting uncomfortably. I'm here to help. Eli studied him for a long moment. Help with what exactly? Whatever needs doing. I want to understand this place, really understand it. Carter cleared his throat. I've never actually worked in any of the buildings I've helped manage. Several staff members arriving for the day stopped to stare. Miss Ruby, who ran the front desk, raised her eyebrows so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Eli crossed his arms. Fine, you can start by helping clear out storage room B. It needs organizing before the weekly food distribution. Carter nodded, following Eli down a dim hallway to a cluttered room packed with boxes and supplies. Dust floated in the air, catching the light from a single bulb. Start by moving everything out, Eli instructed. Then we'll sort it properly. He handed Carter a dust mask. And wear this. Some of these boxes haven't been touched in years. For the next 2 hours, Eli checked in between his repair jobs. Each time, he found Carter working steadily, despite his obvious inexperience. The man's expensive watch was carefully set aside, and sweat had begun to soak through his shirt. Around mid-morning, several veterans gathered in the break room. Carter was taking a water break when old Joe, a Vietnam vet who'd been coming to the center for decades, started sharing stories. Lost my leg in '69, Joe said, tapping his prosthetic. Came home to people spitting at me. This center, only place that felt safe back then. He looked directly at Carter. Still is. Marcus, a younger veteran who'd served in Iraq, joined in. When I got back, the PTSD was so bad I couldn't hold down a job. Couldn't even go to the grocery store without panicking. He gestured around the room. The counseling here saved my life. Free of charge, no questions asked. Carter listened intently, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something more humble. When Rosa, a former Army medic, described facing both racism and sexism during her service, Carter's face flushed with shame at remembering his own prejudiced remarks in the parking lot. By afternoon, Carter had moved on to mopping floors. His technique was awful, more pushing water around than actually cleaning, but he didn't complain or quit. Eli watched from the doorway as Carter redid the same section 3 times, trying to get it right. You're flooding the baseboards, Eli said finally, unable to watch anymore. He demonstrated the proper technique. Like this, firm pressure, steady strokes. Carter adjusted his grip on the mop. Thanks. He paused, then added, I've never mopped anything before. I noticed. My father would say this kind of work is beneath our family name. Eli's expression hardened. No honest work is beneath anyone. I'm starting to understand that, Carter replied quietly, returning to his task with renewed focus. At closing time, Eli found Carter still working on the floors, his expensive jeans now dirty and wet at the hems. The sight of the corporate heir doing menial labor should have been satisfying, but instead, it left Eli unsettled. This wasn't the same man who had sneered at him in the parking lot. Time to lock up, Eli announced, jingling his keys. Carter straightened, wincing at what were surely unused muscles protesting. Same time tomorrow? Eli hesitated before answering. If you're serious about this, yes. Same time tomorrow. He watched Carter gather his things and walk to his car, moving stiffly but with his head held high. The man's persistence was unexpected, and Eli wasn't sure what to make of it. Trust wasn't something he gave easily anymore, not after losing so much. But seeing Carter work without complaint all day had cracked something in his certainty about the man's character. Eli locked the front doors, his mind troubled by the possibility that Carter Langford might be more complicated than he'd assumed. That was a dangerous thought. Hope always came with risk, and Eli had learned the hard way that risk usually meant loss. The morning rain drummed steadily against the windows of the community center as Eli and Carter worked side by side, their breath visible in small puffs in the cool, damp air. Water dripped through worn weather stripping with a rhythmic ping-ping-ping, forming small puddles on the wooden sills that had clearly seen decades of similar storms. The old building groaned softly as the wind picked up, rattling the loose panes they were working to repair. Eli demonstrated the proper technique for removing the old caulking, his movements precise and practiced, the result of years spent fixing things that others might have simply replaced. His calloused hands guided the putty knife with the same steady confidence he'd once used on aircraft controls, each scrape deliberate and efficient. You'll want to scrape it clean first, Eli explained, his voice neutral but professional, the way he might have briefed a rookie pilot. Otherwise, the new seal won't hold. See how this old stuff's all brittle and cracked? That's what happens when you try to patch over problems instead of fixing them right. Carter nodded, following Eli's example with less graceful but determined motions. His expensive Rolex was carefully stored in his pocket, a precaution he'd learned after nearly scratching it yesterday, and his sleeves were rolled up to reveal arms that were clearly unused to manual labor. Small blisters had already formed on his palms from the unfamiliar work, but he pressed on without complaint. The silence between them was broken only by the steady scratch of putty knives against old wood and the gentle patter of rain against glass. Carter found himself studying Eli's technique, not just the mechanics of the repair, but the quiet patience with which the veteran approached each task. There was something almost meditative about the way Eli worked, as if each careful scrape was helping to smooth away more than just old caulking. "Morning, boys!" a cheerful voice called out across the room. Nurse Alma Duncan approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee balanced on a small tray, her uniform scrubs replaced today with comfortable jeans and a cardigan that had seen many washings but still held its shape. "Thought you might need these. It's perfect weather for fixing these old windows. Nothing like being inside and useful when it's nasty out there." The rich aroma of fresh coffee cut through the scent of old wood and damp air. Alma's presence seemed to bring warmth to the chilly room, her smile genuine and motherly in a way that reminded Carter painfully of his own mother, who had passed when he was still in college. "Thanks, Alma," Eli said warmly, accepting the cup with a grateful nod. His fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug as if drawing comfort from its warmth. "You always know exactly when we need it most." Carter looked up from his work, about to give a perfunctory thank you, the kind of polite but distant response he'd perfected in countless business meetings, when he noticed the military service pins carefully arranged on Alma's cardigan, a small American flag crossed with a medical caduceus, and beneath them, a pin that read, "Army Strong." His expression shifted from casual acknowledgement to genuine curiosity. "You served?" he asked, setting down his putty knife and giving her his complete attention. 20 years as an Army nurse," she replied, her kind eyes carrying a hint of steel that spoke of battles fought both on foreign soil and closer to home. "Saw action in 3 different deployments, though getting hired stateside after discharge." She paused, her smile taking on a slightly sardonic edge. "Well, that was another battle entirely." Carter paused his work completely now, wiping his hands on the old towel Eli had provided. Something in Alma's tone suggested there was more to this story, and he found himself genuinely wanting to understand. "What do you mean?" Alma leaned against the wall, her expression thoughtful as she gazed out at the rain-soaked parking lot. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of experience tempered by hard-won wisdom. "Being a black woman veteran in the 70s and 80s, let's just say some folks had trouble seeing past their own assumptions. Hospitals would interview me over the phone, all excited about my qualifications and experience. But when I'd show up in person..." She shrugged, the gesture conveying volumes about disappointments and closed doors. "They'd suddenly discover the position had been filled, or decide they needed someone with different experience. This center was the first place that valued my experience over their prejudices, that saw my hands as healing hands instead of just, well, different hands." Carter's face flushed with shame, the heat rising from his collar as he remembered his own prejudiced behavior just days ago, the way he'd looked at Eli, the assumptions he'd made, the cutting words that had come so easily. That's not right. With your qualifications, your service record..." "Life isn't always about qualifications, Mr. Langford," Alma said gently, her tone free of bitterness despite the injustices she'd described. "Sometimes it's about who's willing to look deeper, to see the person behind the paperwork, the heart behind the uniform. That's what this place does. That's what makes it special." From the corner of his eye, Carter noticed Eli's hands had stilled on his work, his weathered fingers gripping the putty knife as he listened intently. There was something in Eli's stillness that suggested Alma's words resonated deeply with his own experiences. The sound of footsteps echoed from the main hallway, and a tall man in his 50s approached their work area. His Marine Corps cap was worn with obvious pride despite its faded fabric and frayed edges, and his bearing still carried the unmistakable posture of a career military man. His eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone who'd learned to quickly evaluate any situation. "Speaking truth as always, Nurse Duncan," he said, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of a man who'd shouted orders across parade grounds and whispered comfort to wounded soldiers. He extended his hand to Carter with the directness of someone who believed in meeting problems head-on. "Name's Mike Sullivan, Master Sergeant retired, and you're the Langford who's been helping out around here." Carter shook his hand, noting the strength in the older man's grip and the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. Sullivan's eyes were clear and intelligent, but they carried a weight Carter was beginning to recognize in many of the veterans he'd met. The look of someone who'd seen too much, but refused to let it break them. "This place saved my life," Sullivan stated matter-of-factly, with the blunt honesty that military service often instilled. "After Sarah, my wife, passed from cancer, I couldn't bear the empty house, the silence where her laughter used to be. Spent 2 years barely leaving my couch, living on takeout and old memories." He gestured around the room with a sweeping motion that encompassed not just the physical space, but everything it represented. "Then my neighbor, bless her persistent heart, literally dragged me here one Tuesday morning, said I was gonna rot away if I didn't get out and be useful, found people who understood what it meant to lose everything that mattered, found purpose again, helping other vets navigate the system that's supposed to help us, but sometimes just makes us feel more lost." Carter set down his putty knife completely, fully engaged by the raw honesty in Sullivan's voice. Around him, he could sense that other veterans had quietly gathered, drawn by the familiar rhythm of shared stories. "How long ago was that?" 3 years this March," Sullivan answered, his voice warming as he spoke. "Now I'm here almost every day. Help guys fill out paperwork, drive them to appointments, teach them how to work through the bureaucracy that keeps their benefits tied up in red tape. These people," he glanced meaningfully at Eli and Alma, then around at the other faces that had gathered. "They're not just friends, they're family. The kind of family that chooses you because of who you are, not who you used to be or what you used to have." The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as more veterans filtered through the room, each carrying their own stories of struggle and redemption. Carter found himself listening intently to each one, asking thoughtful questions that went beyond polite interest, his window repair completely forgotten as he became absorbed in these tales of human resilience. There was Maria, who'd served as a helicopter mechanic and now taught automotive repair to other women veterans. There was James, whose PTSD had cost him 2 marriages but who'd found peace in the center's woodworking program. Each story was different, yet each carried the same thread of finding hope in community, of discovering that healing was possible when you didn't have to face the darkness alone. Eli worked steadily beside Carter throughout these conversations, his hands moving with practiced efficiency even as he kept stealing glances at Carter's genuine interactions. Something in the veteran's posture had shifted, a subtle relaxation that suggested he was reassessing his earlier judgments. During a quiet moment, when the storytellers had moved on to other tasks and the rain had settled into a gentler rhythm, Carter gathered his courage. His heart hammered against his ribs as he formed the words he'd been wanting to ask for days. "Eli, about your call sign, Sparrow. I heard someone mention it meant something special." Eli's hands stilled again, and this time the putty knife trembled slightly in his grip. The rain seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed, each drop against glass marking the seconds as they stretched between question and answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured, as if each word had to be carefully chosen. "It wasn't my idea," he began, his eyes fixed on the window frame rather than meeting Carter's gaze. "The other pilots gave it to me after a particularly rough mission over Afghanistan. We'd lost contact with ground control, had enemy fire coming from 3 directions, and half the squadron was either panicking or going in guns blazing." He picked up a new piece of weather stripping, measuring it carefully against the window frame with movements that betrayed his need for something to do with his hands. "They said I had this way of staying calm when everything went sideways, of thinking through the chaos instead of just reacting to it. They'd joke that while everyone else was flapping around like hawks in a thunderstorm, I'd just glide through the danger, quiet and steady, finding the path nobody else could see." Carter noticed how Eli's shoulders tensed slightly, how his breathing had become more controlled. "But the memories are difficult?" "Lost some good people over there," Eli replied simply, but the simplicity carried the weight of survivor's guilt that Carter was only beginning to understand. Being calm, sometimes it wasn't enough. Sometimes steady hands and a clear head couldn't save the people you cared about most. Sometimes you come home when better men don't, and you spend the rest of your life wondering why. The weight of unspoken stories hung between them like morning fog, thick with grief and regret and the kind of pain that only time and grace could heal. Carter didn't press further, recognizing the gift of even this small confidence, understanding instinctively that trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt one careful word at a time. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, the window repairs gradually taking shape under their combined efforts. The rain began to lighten, and occasional patches of blue appeared between the gray clouds, sending tentative rays of sunlight through the freshly sealed windows. The light caught the small imperfections in the old glass, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the wooden sills. As the afternoon wore on and their work neared completion, Carter found himself reluctant for the day to end. There was something peaceful about this simple labor, something healing about working alongside a man he was slowly beginning to understand and respect. He gathered his tools carefully, cleaning each one as Eli had shown him, taking care to return them to their proper places in the worn toolbox. They walked together toward the exit, their footsteps echoing softly in the nearly empty center. The afternoon light slanted through the windows they'd repaired, casting long shadows across the scarred wooden floors that had witnessed countless stories of struggle and hope. At the door, Eli paused, his hand resting on the frame as he turned to face Carter. His expression was still guarded, the wariness of a man who'd learned that trust was something to be earned rather than given, but something had shifted subtly in his demeanor. The rigid tension had eased just enough to suggest that walls, like windows, could be repaired with patience and the right tools. "Thanks for helping today," he said quietly, the words carrying more weight than their simple meaning. "Means something to have extra hands that aren't afraid of honest work." The moment hung between them, fragile but real, the first crack in the wall of Eli's distrust, a small step toward understanding, like the first green shoot pushing through winter soil toward the promise of spring. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the community center's windows as Maddie burst through the front doors, her backpack bouncing with each step. Her face lit up when she spotted Carter organizing supplies in the craft room. "Mr. Carter," she called out, waving enthusiastically. "Are you helping today too?" Carter looked up from the box of markers he was sorting, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I sure am. And please, just Carter is fine." Maddie dumped her backpack on one of the tables and began pulling out her sketchbook and colored pencils. "Will you draw with me? Daddy's fixing the heating thing again, but he said I could stay here until he's done." "I'd love to," Carter replied, pulling up a child-sized chair that made his knees nearly touch his chest. "Though I have to warn you, I'm not very good at art." "That's okay," Maddie assured him with the wise confidence only an 8-year-old could muster. "Art isn't about being good. It's about showing what's in your heart." Carter watched as she flipped open her sketchbook, revealing pages filled with colorful drawings. Some showed the community center, others depicted various veterans who frequented the building, and many featured Eli in his work clothes, usually with tools in hand. "These are amazing, Maddie," Carter said, genuinely impressed by the detail and emotion captured in her childlike strokes. Maddie beamed at the praise and turned to a fresh page. "I'm making a special one today," she announced, selecting her favorite pencils with careful consideration. As she drew, Carter helped sharpen her pencils and offered suggestions for colors. The picture slowly took shape, 3 figures standing in front of what appeared to be the community center. He recognized Eli's tall form, Maddie's smaller figure, and a faint outline of a woman with a gentle smile. "Is that your mom?" Carter asked softly. Maddie nodded, adding delicate strokes to the woman's face. "Daddy says she watches over us from heaven now, but sometimes he gets sad when he looks at her pictures, so I draw her light, like an angel." Carter felt a familiar ache in his chest, remembering his own loss. "I lost someone too," he found himself saying. "My brother Noah. Was he a soldier like Daddy?" "Yes, he was." Carter watched as Maddie continued drawing. "I miss him every day." Maddie looked up at him thoughtfully, then reached for a new pencil. To Carter's surprise, she began adding another figure to the drawing, a person standing next to Eli. "That's you," she explained, carefully coloring in his suit. "Because you help Daddy feel less alone, I can tell." The simple statement hit Carter like a physical force. His throat tightened as he stared at the drawing, at this child's vision of him as part of their small family. All his life, he'd sought approval in boardrooms and social circles, yet here was acceptance freely given by an 8-year-old girl who saw past his mistakes. "Maddie," he managed, his voice rough with emotion, That's very kind of you." From the doorway came the sound of someone clearing their throat. Carter looked up to find Eli standing there, still in his work clothes, watching the scene with an expression that seemed caught between caution and something softer. "Daddy!" Maddie held up her drawing proudly. "Look what I made! It's all of us!" Eli crossed the room and crouched beside his daughter, studying the picture. His eyes lingered on the faint figure of his late wife, then moved to Carter's drawn form. Something flickered across his face, understanding perhaps, or recognition of the same loneliness Carter felt. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Eli said, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Why don't we all take a break? I brought some snacks from the kitchen." They gathered around the small table, sharing apple slices and peanut butter crackers. Maddie chatted happily about her day at school while the two men listened, the usual tension between them eased by her presence. Carter noticed how Eli's shoulders had relaxed, how his replies to Maddie carried warmth and gentle humor. The rain had started again outside, creating a cozy atmosphere in the craft room. Maddie continued drawing, now making individual portraits of everyone she knew at the center. Carter helped her label them, learning the stories behind each face she captured in her childlike style. When the evening grew late, Eli began gathering Maddie's supplies. "Time to head home, kiddo. Got to get dinner started." Maddie carefully tore the family drawing from her sketchbook and handed it to Carter. "This is for you," she said, "so you remember you're not alone either." Carter accepted the paper with trembling hands, carefully folding it and tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Maddie. I'll keep it safe." They walked together to the center's entrance. Eli pulled out his keys, the familiar routine of locking up now, including Carter's presence. The rain had softened to a gentle mist and the parking lot lights created halos in the growing darkness. Standing under the covered entrance, Eli watched as Maddie gave Carter a quick hug before skipping to their truck. His expression was thoughtful, measuring the changes that had occurred in such a short time. Without speaking, he gave Carter a small nod, acknowledgement of something shifting between them, though neither man was ready to name it yet. The early morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Eli pulled into the community center's parking lot. His old truck's headlights swept across the building's entrance, catching flashes of red, white, and blue ribbons fluttering in the dawn breeze. He blinked, wondering if his tired eyes were playing tricks on him, but as he stepped out of his truck, there was no mistaking it. The entire front of the center had been transformed overnight. Handmade posters lined the walls, and a large banner stretched across the entrance read Sparrow Day in bold letters. "What in the world?" Eli muttered, reaching for his keys. Before he could unlock the door, it swung open. Carter stood there grinning, dressed more casually than Eli had ever seen him in jeans and a polo shirt. "You're early," Carter said. "We weren't expecting you for another hour." "I always come in early on Thursdays to check the—" Eli gestured at the decorations. "What is all this?" Carter's smile widened. "Come see for yourself." Inside, the community room had been completely rearranged. Chairs were set up in rows facing a small podium. The walls were covered with photographs. Many Eli recognized from his service days, others he hadn't seen in years. In one corner, a table displayed his medals and commendations, carefully arranged beside newspaper clippings about missions he'd flown. "Carter," Eli's voice came out rough, "how did you—" "Your old squadron mates helped," Carter explained. "Once they heard what we were planning, they sent everything they had. Photos, letters, stories. Turns out Sparrow was pretty well documented." Eli moved closer to the display, his fingers hovering over a faded photograph of his original flight crew. "This was my first deployment," he said softly. "I hadn't seen this picture in 15 years. More volunteers began arriving, carrying trays of breakfast foods and coffee. Each person who entered seemed to beam at Eli, clearly in on the surprise. Even the center's director appeared, wearing a tie decorated with tiny birds. "The whole thing was Carter's idea," the director said, clapping Eli on the shoulder. "Said it was time we properly honored our local hero." Eli turned to Carter, who suddenly looked uncertain. Is this okay? I know you're private about your service, but I thought—" "It's more than okay," Eli cut in, his voice thick with emotion. "I just don't understand why." "Because you deserve it," Carter said simply, "and because everyone here needs to know what kind of man is fighting for this place." The room began filling with familiar faces, veterans who relied on the center, volunteers who worked alongside Eli, families whose lives he'd touched without realizing it. Maddie arrived with her teacher, carrying a handmade card covered in drawings of sparrows. When everyone was seated, Carter stepped up to the podium. "Most of you know Eli Ward as our resident fix-it man," he began, "the guy who keeps our boilers running and our lights on. But 15 years ago, he was known by a different name, Sparrow." Carter went on to share stories that had been collected, tales of Eli's courage under fire, of lives saved through his quick thinking and steady hands. With each story, Eli felt the walls he'd built around those memories slowly crumbling. Other speakers followed. A retired sergeant described how Eli had landed a damaged plane in a sandstorm to rescue stranded troops. A former medic recalled Eli flying through heavy fire to evacuate wounded soldiers. Through it all, Eli sat with Maddie's small hand in his, watching his past unfold through others' eyes. Then Carter shared something that made Eli's heart stop. "My brother Noah wrote about Sparrow in his journals," he said, holding up a worn notebook. "He called him the guardian angel of the skies. Noah never knew your real name, Eli, but he knew your heart. And now, watching you fight for this center, for these people, I understand exactly what he meant." Eli felt tears threatening. He hadn't cried since his wife's funeral, but here, surrounded by so much love and respect, his emotions overwhelmed him. When the formal presentations ended, people mingled over coffee and pastries, veterans swapped stories, children asked Eli questions about flying, and the whole center hummed with warmth and connection. Eli found himself sharing memories he'd kept locked away for years, feeling the healing power of finally letting others in. During a quiet moment, Carter found Eli by the photo display. "I hope this wasn't too much," he said. Eli shook his head. "It's perfect. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I lost Sarah, I closed myself off, focused only on Maddie and staying afloat. But being here, seeing all this, it reminds me there's more to life than just surviving." "I know what you mean," Carter replied. "After Noah died, I threw myself into work trying to fill the void. But being here, helping you, it's like having a piece of him back, like gaining another brother." Eli looked at Carter, really looked at him, seeing past the wealthy exterior to the man beneath. Someone who understood loss, who was trying to do better, to be better. "You know," Eli said with a slight smile, "I always wanted a younger brother to boss around." Carter laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Well, I always wanted an older brother who actually knew how to fix things instead of just throwing money at problems." They were interrupted by Maddie, who had dozed off in a chair and was now rubbing her eyes sleepily. Eli scooped her up, and she immediately nestled against his shoulder. "Time to lock up?" Carter asked, already reaching for his keys. "Yeah," Eli agreed. "Been quite a day." They walked through the center together, turning off lights and checking doors. The Sparrow Day banner still hung proudly, a reminder of bridges built and trust earned. "We're going to save this place," Carter said as they reached the entrance. "Whatever it takes." "Side by side," Eli agreed, shifting Maddie gently in his arms. Carter held the door as Eli carried his sleeping daughter out. They shared a laugh when Maddie mumbled something about sparrows in her sleep, the sound of their friendship echoing in the quiet evening air. The next morning's sunrise painted the community center in warm, golden light. Inside the main office, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the musty scent of old papers as Eli worked the coffee maker while Carter spread documents across a folding table. "This coffee maker's seen better days," Eli said, tapping the ancient machine, "but she still makes a mean cup." Carter looked up from his paperwork with a tired smile. "After yesterday's celebration, I think we all need it." He shuffled through more papers, his optimism from Sparrow Day still evident in his voice. "These financial reports show the center's actual community impact. The board has to listen to these numbers." Eli poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to Carter's the way he'd learned he liked it. It struck him how easily they'd fallen into these morning routines. The memory of their parking lot confrontation felt like ancient history. The peaceful moment shattered when Carter's phone buzzed. His face fell as he read the message. "Emergency board meeting," Carter said, standing quickly. "They want me there now." "Need backup?" Eli asked, only half joking. Carter forced a smile. "I've got this. Probably just more questions about the reports." He gathered his jacket and hurried out, leaving his coffee untouched. Hours passed with no word from Carter. Eli tried to focus on his repair work, but worry gnawed at him. When Carter finally returned that afternoon, one look at his face told Eli everything had gone wrong. Carter's usual confident posture was gone. He looked defeated, almost shell-shocked. "They're not waiting 30 days, he said, his voice hollow. "The demolition starts today. They've removed me from leadership. I can't stop it anymore." The words hit Eli like physical blows. "Today? But you said—" He stopped, anger rising in his throat. "You promised you could fix this." "I tried," Carter insisted, reaching for Eli's shoulder. "I fought them with everything I had." Eli jerked away. "Did you? Or was this the plan all along? Get close to us, make us trust you, then soften the blow. No, how could you think that after everything? After what? A few weeks of playing at being one of us? Eli's voice rose. Was Sparrow Day just part of the act? Other veterans and volunteers gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. Through the crowd, Maddie appeared, her eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy!" she called out. "Why are you yelling?" Eli's anger crumbled at the sight of his daughter's fear. Outside, the rumble of trucks and machinery grew louder. "Please," Carter begged. "Let me explain. I'll find another way." "There is no other way," Eli cut him off. "You're exactly what I thought you were that first day. Come on, Maddie." "No!" Maddie cried, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't fight! Mr. Carter is our friend now!" The word friend twisted in Eli's chest like a knife. He took Maddie's hand, gentle despite his anger. "We need to go, sweetheart." "Carter," Maddie sobbed, reaching back toward him. "Please don't let them take our center." Carter stood frozen, watching helplessly as Eli led Maddie away. Through the windows, workers were already setting up demolition fencing around the parking lot. The setting sun cast long shadows through the chain link, marking the end of everything they'd built together. The room emptied slowly as other center members left, some shooting angry glances at Carter, others looking away in disappointment. Soon he stood alone in the growing darkness, surrounded by yesterday's Sparrow Day decorations that now seemed to mock him. Outside, floodlights clicked on, illuminating the parking lot where he'd first met Eli. Workers continued setting up barriers, preparing to tear down not just a building, but a community's heart. Carter remained motionless, watching through the window as everything he'd come to care about slipped away into the gathering dusk. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter's penthouse, but he barely noticed. Takeout containers and half-empty coffee cups littered his usually pristine space. Stacks of financial reports and legal documents covered every surface, their pages marked with desperate notes and highlighted passages, all useless now. Carter sat motionless in his leather armchair, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled suit. His phone lay silent beside him, showing dozens of unanswered messages from board members and lawyers. The only calls he'd tried to make were to Eli, 7 of them, all sent straight to voicemail. A cleaning service had left a fresh breakfast tray by his door hours ago. The eggs had long since gone cold, the toast hardened to cardboard. Carter couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. The gnawing in his stomach felt appropriate somehow, a physical echo of the emptiness inside him. He forced himself up and walked to the window. From 30 stories up, the city looked deceptively peaceful. But somewhere down there, demolition crews were gathering at Willow Creek Veterans Community Center. The thought made him sick. "I'm sorry, Noah," he whispered, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. "I tried to fix it. I failed." Unable to stay still, Carter grabbed his keys. He had to see it for himself. The drive to the center took longer than usual, morning traffic crawling at a maddening pace. When he finally turned onto the familiar street, his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze. A massive excavator loomed over the building like a prehistoric beast, its metal claw ready to strike. Carter parked across the street, watching workers in hard hats consult blueprints and mark spray paint lines on the pavement. The center's windows were already boarded up, the cheerful welcome sign removed. No children played in the yard where just days ago Maddie had been drawing pictures. No veterans gathered on the benches where they'd shared their stories of struggle and survival. He pulled out his phone again, finding Eli's number. The call went straight to voicemail, just like all the others. "Eli, please," Carter said after the beep, his voice rough. "I know you don't believe me, but I fought for the center. I'm still fighting. I never meant to." He stopped, words failing him. What could he possibly say to make this right? The demolition foreman was starting to direct vehicles into position. Carter couldn't watch anymore. He drove aimlessly through the city, eventually finding himself at his own apartment building's parking garage. But instead of heading up to his penthouse, he went to the storage unit in the basement. The space was cluttered with expensive furniture he'd never used and boxes he'd never unpacked. In the back corner sat a plain cardboard box labeled simply Noah. Carter hadn't opened it since the funeral. He lifted the box carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. Inside were his brother's deployment journals, photographs, and letters, pieces of a life cut tragically short. Carter had never been able to bring himself to read them fully, too afraid of facing his brother's goodness, his courage, his faith, everything Carter himself lacked. As he shifted through the contents, a sealed envelope caught his eye. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the writing was clear. For the Langford who lost his way. Carter's hands trembled. He recognized Noah's handwriting immediately. How many times had this letter been in the box, waiting for him to find it? Waiting for this exact moment when he'd lost everything. His position, his purpose, his chance to make things right. He couldn't open it. Not yet. Not here in this dark storage unit surrounded by expensive, meaningless things. Minutes later, Carter sat in his parked car outside the cemetery where Noah was buried, the unopened letter resting heavy in his hands. The morning had grown overcast, clouds gathering overhead like witnesses to his hesitation. A text alert lit up his phone, another message from the board about finalizing the demolition timeline. Carter ignored it, staring at the letter that seemed to hold all the answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery creaked as Carter pushed them open. Morning dew clung to the grass, dampening his expensive leather shoes as he walked the familiar path to Noah's grave. The rising sun painted the rows of headstones in soft amber light, creating long shadows that stretched across the peaceful grounds. Carter's fingers trembled as he touched the smooth granite of his brother's headstone. The letter felt heavy in his jacket pocket, like it carried the weight of years of unspoken words. He settled onto the cold ground, not caring about his designer suit anymore. "I should have come sooner," he whispered, tracing Noah's name with his fingertips. "I have been such a coward." Birds chirped in the distance as Carter finally pulled out the worn envelope. It was addressed simply, "To the Langford who lost his way." The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but Noah's neat handwriting remained clear and strong. Carter took a deep breath and broke the seal. The letter inside was several pages long, the paper crisp despite its age. He unfolded it with careful hands and began to read. "Dear Carter, if you're reading this, it means two things. I'm gone, and you've finally met Sparrow. I've been praying for both of those moments, one with sadness, one with hope. I know you think I'm the good brother, the noble one, but that's not true. I just learned earlier what you're learning now, that true wealth isn't in our bank accounts but in how we lift others up. Remember when we were kids and you would give your allowance to that homeless man outside the library? That's who you really are, Carter. That goodness is still in you, buried under years of Dad's expectations and corporate pride. I wish I had told you more about my deployments, about the men and women who taught me what real courage looks like, especially Sparrow. He never wanted recognition or rewards. He just showed up every day, did what was right, and helped others without asking anything in return. You know what amazed me most about him? He had every reason to be bitter. Life hadn't been fair to him, but he chose hope instead of hatred. He chose to believe in people, even when they didn't believe in themselves. Carter had to pause, wiping his eyes. The morning sun had risen higher, warming his back as he continued reading. "I see that same potential in you, brother. Dad tried to make us believe that success meant profit margins and power moves. But real success, it's in the moments when we choose to be better than our circumstances. It's in the times we put others first, even when it costs us everything. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty. I'm writing because I know someday you'll hit rock bottom, and you'll need to remember who you really are. Not the corporate heir, not the board member, but the boy who once gave away his lunch money to feed a stray dog. The world needs that Carter Langford, the one with a heart bigger than his wallet, the one who sees people as people, not as assets or liabilities." Carter's hands shook as he turned to the final page. "If you ever find Sparrow, tell him I never stopped praying for him, and tell him you still have goodness in you too. He'll understand what that means better than anyone. Don't waste time with regrets, Carter. Use them as fuel to do better. Be the man I always knew you could be, the one who chooses right over easy, compassion over comfort. I love you, brother. Even when you forget who you are, I never did." The letter fell to Carter's lap as quiet sobs shook his shoulders. Years of buried emotions broke through his carefully maintained facade. Here, in the privacy of the cemetery, he finally let himself grieve, not just for Noah, but for the person he'd allowed himself to become. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the headstone. "I'm so sorry I forgot who I was." The morning breeze rustled the trees overhead, and somewhere nearby, a mourning dove called out. Carter sat in silence for several minutes, letting Noah's words sink deep into his heart. Each breath felt clearer, like fog lifting from his mind. His brother's faith in him, even from beyond the grave, burned away the last traces of his hesitation. Noah had seen through his corporate mask to the heart underneath. And now Eli had seen it too, before Carter's failure had shattered that trust. Looking at his reflection in the polished granite, Carter barely recognized himself. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from sitting on the ground, but his eyes held something new, or perhaps something very old, finally rediscovered. "I know what I have to do," he said to Noah's grave, his voice stronger now. He carefully folded the letter and returned it to his pocket, right over his heart. Standing up, Carter brushed the grass from his knees. The sun had fully risen now, painting the cemetery in bright morning light. He took one last look at his brother's headstone, touching it gently in farewell. With renewed purpose, Carter strode back to his car. His hands were steady as he gripped the steering wheel, and for the first time in days, his path was clear. The town hall waited ahead, and with it, the chance to finally become the man both Noah and Eli had seen in him. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of concerned citizens packed shoulder to shoulder. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the chamber floor. Eli sat in the back row, his work boots still dusty from the day's repairs, his expression grim as he watched the council members shuffle papers at their elevated desk. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. Item 7 on today's agenda, the proposed rezoning and demolition of 1420 Willow Creek Road, currently operating as the Veterans Community Center. A few rows ahead, Eli noticed several Langford corporate board members in expensive suits, their faces impassive as they reviewed documents. His stomach tightened. This was just a formality. The decision had already been made in boardrooms far from here. The council will now hear public comments before... Mayor Thompson's words cut off as the heavy double doors burst open. Carter Langford strode down the center aisle, his tie loose and his hair disheveled. Dark circles ringed his eyes, but his stride was purposeful. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Madam Mayor," Carter's voice carried clearly through the chamber, "I request the floor as a concerned citizen." The mayor blinked, surprised. "Mr. Langford, while this is irregular..." "Please." Carter's tone was different from his usual corporate polish. "What I have to say changes everything about this proposal." She nodded slowly. "You have 5 minutes." Carter reached the podium and gripped its edges. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Eli before addressing the crowd. "My name is Carter Langford, and until this morning, I was heir to Langford Enterprises." He paused as murmurs filled the room. "I say was because I've just signed papers formally renouncing my inheritance and resigning from the company." The corporate board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One started to stand, but Carter pressed on. "I've spent the past weeks at the Veterans Center, learning what real value means, not stock prices or property values, but human dignity, community, hope." His voice cracked slightly. "My brother Noah understood this. Before he died serving overseas, he wrote me a letter I only read this morning." Carter pulled out a worn envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "He knew I was lost, knew I'd forgotten what matters, but he believed I could find my way back through acts of genuine compassion." Eli leaned forward, his heart pounding as Carter continued. "I've discovered documents proving systematic discrimination in our corporate practices, deliberate targeting of vulnerable communities for displacement, false environmental reports." Carter pulled out a thick folder. "I'm turning all of this over to the council and proper authorities." The board members were now openly protesting, but Carter raised his voice. "Furthermore, I'm pledging my personal fortune, separate from company holdings, to establish a nonprofit foundation. Its first act will be purchasing and renovating the Veterans Center, protecting it permanently from corporate interests." He turned to face the board directly. "You can sue me, try to discredit me, but you can't stop me from choosing what's right, from honoring my brother's memory and the heroes he served with." Tears glistened in Carter's eyes as he continued. "In that center, I've witnessed more courage, dignity, and faith than in all my years in corporate boardrooms. I've seen veterans helping each other heal, children finding safe haven, people of all backgrounds joining together in genuine community." His voice grew stronger. "My brother wrote that I still had goodness in me, that I could learn to serve others instead of myself. Today, I choose to prove him right." Looking directly at Eli now, Carter's voice softened. "I've learned that real strength isn't about power or money. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. It's about having the courage to change, to admit when you're wrong, to put others first." Eli felt his own eyes growing moist as Carter concluded. "I ask this council to halt the demolition. Let me prove that compassion and corporate responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. Let me help build something that truly serves this community, not as a Langford heir, but as a humble citizen trying to do what's right. The chamber erupted in applause. Mayor Thompson had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. Given these extraordinary circumstances and new evidence presented, I move to temporarily suspend the demolition order pending full review. Seconded, called another council member immediately. All in favor? A forest of hands rose. The vote was unanimous. The applause returned, drowning out the angry protests of the corporate board members as they stormed out. Eli sat stunned, watching as people surrounded Carter, shaking his hand and patting his back. In Carter's face, Eli saw not the arrogant heir who had insulted him weeks ago, but a man transformed by genuine humility and purpose. The crowd celebration continued as afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the ordinary council chamber into something almost sacred, a place where courage and compassion had won the day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town hall steps as people filtered out of the building. Eli stood near a weathered oak tree, one hand resting on Maddie's shoulder. She fidgeted with the straps of her backpack, watching the door intently for Carter to emerge. "Daddy, is Mr. Carter really giving up being rich to help us?" Maddie asked, her eyes wide with childlike wonder. Eli squeezed her shoulder gently. "Looks that way, sweetheart." His voice was thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. The heavy wooden doors opened again, and Carter appeared, looking simultaneously exhausted and energized. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually perfect hair was ruffled from running his hands through it during his speech. Several people stopped him on the steps, shaking his hand or patting his back. He smiled politely but kept glancing toward where Eli and Maddie waited. Finally breaking free from the crowd, Carter walked toward them. His steps slowed as he got closer, uncertainty crossing his face. The distance between them felt heavy with unspoken words. Maddie broke the tension, bouncing on her toes. "Mr. Carter, you were so brave in there." A genuine smile softened Carter's features. "Thanks, Maddie." He looked at Eli, his expression turning serious. "I hope you know I meant every word." Eli shifted his weight, struggling to find the right words. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, warming their faces as they stood in awkward silence. "I was wrong about you," Eli finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "When the demolition got moved up, I assumed the worst. Thought maybe this whole friendship was just—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "A corporate strategy?" Carter finished, pain flashing across his face. "Yeah." Eli met his eyes. "I'm sorry for that. Should have known better after everything we've been through these past weeks." Carter's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I'm the one who should be sorry. That first day in the parking lot, the way I treated you, the things I said." He ran a hand through his hair. "I was so caught up in my own importance, I couldn't see past my privilege, couldn't see the real people my decisions were hurting." "You've changed since then," Eli said softly. "Because of you, both of you." Carter looked between Eli and Maddie. "You showed me what real strength looks like, what it means to serve others instead of yourself." Maddie tugged on Carter's sleeve. "Does this mean you're staying? You won't disappear?" Carter knelt down to her level. "I'm not going anywhere, kiddo, promise." "Good," she declared, suddenly throwing her arms around his neck in a tight hug. "'Cause you're family now." Carter's eyes grew wet as he hugged her back. When he straightened, Eli stepped forward and pulled him into a firm embrace. The gesture caught Carter off guard, but he returned it immediately, letting out a shaky breath. "Noah would be proud of you," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I am." Carter's shoulders trembled slightly. "I found his letter this morning, at his grave." He pulled back enough to meet Eli's gaze. He never stopped believing in both of us, the hero pilot who saved his squad, and the lost brother who needed saving himself. He always could see the best in people, Eli agreed, smiling sadly, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Maddie slipped her small hands into both of theirs. "Can we go see the center? I want to make a sign that says 'Saved' to put on the fence." Both men laughed, the heavy moment lifting. The demolition fencing still stood around the building, but now it felt more like a cocoon than a death sentence. Something temporary protecting the change happening within. "Sure thing, sweetheart," Eli said. He glanced at Carter. "We've got a lot of planning to do anyway, converting to a nonprofit, setting up proper programs." "One step at a time," Carter agreed. "But we'll do it right." They started walking together down the tree-lined street toward the center. The setting sun painted everything in warm golden light, including the "no trespassing" signs that would soon be replaced with welcome banners. Maddie skipped between them, chattering about her ideas for new art classes and veteran programs. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and both men found themselves grinning as they listened to her plans. "You know," Eli said thoughtfully, "when Noah talked about family, he always said it wasn't about blood, it was about who shows up when it matters most." Carter nodded, emotion tightening his throat. He was right about that too. The three of them walked on as the sun continued its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Behind them, the town hall stood as a silent witness to the day's transformation. Ahead, the center waited for its new chapter to begin. The morning sun cast long, golden shadows across the Willow Creek Veterans Community Center's cracked asphalt parking lot. Trucks and cars lined the perimeter like a protective barrier, their beds loaded with lumber, toolboxes, paint cans, and renovation supplies. The crisp autumn air hummed with purposeful activity as volunteers in worn work clothes gathered in small clusters, sharing steaming coffee from dented thermoses and planning the ambitious day ahead. Their breath created small clouds in the cool morning air, and the sound of friendly chatter mixed with the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Carter Langford stood by his pickup truck, not the gleaming luxury sedan he'd arrived in just weeks ago, but a practical used Ford with honest rust spots and a dent in the tailgate that he'd bought after voluntarily giving up his inheritance. He wore faded jeans with paint stains on the knees and a plain cotton work shirt that had seen better days, his hands already grimy from unloading heavy boxes of supplies. The transformation in his appearance perfectly matched the profound change in his heart. Where once he'd stood with the rigid posture of corporate authority, now he moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd found his true purpose. The familiar rumble of Eli Ward's well-maintained truck pulled into the lot, and Maddie bounced excitedly in the passenger seat like a spring-loaded toy, her face pressed against the window, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. She jumped out before her father could help her, her small arms wrapped around a large red cooler filled with fresh lemonade she'd insisted on making herself at dawn. "Mr. Carter," she called out across the parking lot, her voice carrying pure joy as she waved enthusiastically with her free hand. "Look what we brought for everyone!" "Just Carter," he reminded her with a warm smile that reached his eyes, crouching down to her level. "No more fancy titles needed around here, remember? We're all just folks working together." Maddie beamed at this reminder of their new equality, her gap-toothed grin infectious. Eli walked over with his characteristic steady gait, extending his calloused hand. The handshake between them carried none of the tension from their explosive first meeting. Instead, it held the solid weight of shared purpose and hard-earned brotherhood. Their eyes met with mutual respect, born from weeks of honest labor and difficult conversations. "Ready to make this thing official?" Eli asked, his voice carrying quiet pride. "Got all the paperwork right here." Carter patted his worn messenger bag, a far cry from the expensive leather briefcase he once carried. "Meeting with the lawyer at 10 sharp to file the nonprofit documentation, the Willow Creek Veterans Support Foundation has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Veterans and community members continued arriving in steady streams. Mrs. Johnson, the retired Army nurse who'd courageously shared her story of discrimination and perseverance with Carter weeks ago, efficiently organized a first aid station complete with bandages, antiseptic, and cold packs. Her movements held the precision of decades in medical service. Tom Martinez, the soft-spoken widowed Marine who still kept his gray hair in a perfect regulation cut, directed parking with military precision, his clipboard and whistle transforming chaos into order. Each person who arrived carried not just tools and supplies, but visible hope and fierce determination etched in their weathered faces. "Lemonade time!" Maddie announced with the seriousness of a CEO launching a new product line. She carefully set up a small card table near the main entrance, meticulously arranging paper cups in neat rows and placing napkins at precise intervals. Her role as official refreshment coordinator was one she took very seriously, adjusting and readjusting everything until it met her exacting standards. Several volunteers stopped by her station, praising her initiative and professional service with the kind of genuine respect usually reserved for adults. She glowed under their attention, standing a little taller with each compliment. Inside the center's main hall, Eli studied the detailed blueprints spread across a folding table like a general planning a campaign. His mechanical expertise, honed through years of keeping military aircraft in peak condition, would be crucial for the major systems upgrades needed throughout the building. Main priority has to be the heating system, he explained to the gathered work crew, pointing to specific areas on the plans with a stubby pencil. Winter's coming fast, and we need this place warm and welcoming for everyone who walks through those doors. Carter joined the planning session after his successful legal meeting, rolling up his sleeves with the practiced motion of someone who'd learned the value of honest work. Non-profit status is officially in process, he reported, unable to hide his satisfaction. Lawyer says we should have full approval within 2 to 3 weeks. Now, where do you need me, boss? Eli grinned at the role reversal, remembering their first hostile encounter. Grab that wrench over there. We've got some stubborn pipes that need replacing in the basement. Throughout the long morning, the center buzzed with productive activity like a well-orchestrated symphony. Veterans shared personal stories as they worked side by side, their voices carrying powerful messages of resilience and hope across the rooms. A young black veteran named Marcus described how the center had helped him successfully readjust to civilian life when other doors remained stubbornly closed due to his race and military background. An elderly Hispanic volunteer named Carlos spoke about finding true family among fellow service members when his own relatives lived thousands of miles away in distant states. This place, Carlos said, pausing in his wall painting to gesture around the transformed room. It doesn't see color or rank or where you come from, just people helping people the way it should be. Carter and Eli worked side by side in the cramped boiler room, their earlier conflicts completely forgotten in the steady rhythm of shared physical labor. Sweat dripped from their foreheads as they wrestled with stubborn copper pipes and ancient fixtures that hadn't been properly maintained in years. The work was hard, honest, and satisfying in ways neither man had expected. You know, Carter said during a much-needed water break, wiping his grimy hands on an old towel, my brother would have absolutely loved this. He always said the military showed him what real community looked like, people from completely different backgrounds coming together for something bigger than themselves. Eli nodded slowly, deep understanding shining in his dark eyes. Noah saw the truth of it better than most. Out there in the desert, we all depend on each other completely. No room for prejudice or judgment when your life's literally in someone else's hands every single day. Maddie appeared like a small angel with fresh lemonade, her young face serious and intent as she carefully studied their mechanical progress. Daddy, is the center going to be okay now? Really and truly? Better than okay, sweetheart, Eli assured her, accepting the cold cup she offered with both gratitude and pride. We're making it stronger than it's ever been before. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, more community members arrived with generous donations of food and additional supplies. Folding tables appeared as if by magic, soon laden with homemade sandwiches, fresh fruit, bags of chips, and an impressive array of homemade treats. The parking lot gradually transformed into an impromptu outdoor gathering space where people from all walks of life shared hearty meals and meaningful conversation under the warm autumn sky. Carter watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction and deep gratitude. This was exactly what his brother had written about in those worn journal pages, the incredible power of unity, of diverse people coming together across artificial differences to support and lift each other up. He felt Noah's spiritual presence strongly in these precious moments, as if his brother were standing right beside him, smiling with approval. The meaningful work continued steadily through the day, each passing hour bringing visible improvements to the beloved center. Fresh coats of paint brightened previously dingy walls, modern fixtures replaced broken and outdated ones, and the heating system gradually came back to reliable life under Eli's expert and patient guidance. As purple twilight began to approach, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Eli and Carter stood together before the center's weathered main entrance. Above them, the old wooden sign waited to be carefully rehung, newly repainted with loving attention but deliberately maintaining its original character and dignity. Together, they lifted it with reverence, their movements perfectly synchronized through long hours of working as true partners rather than adversaries. The sign settled into its metal mounts with a satisfying metallic click that seemed to echo across the quiet parking lot. Both men stepped back slowly, their shoulders naturally touching, to admire their collective work with deep pride. The freshly painted words Willow Creek Veterans Community Center gleamed brilliantly in the fading light against the darkening evening sky, standing as a beacon of genuine hope for all who would come seeking help or offering their own support to others in need. 2 weeks had transformed the Willow Creek Veterans Community Center. Fresh paint gleamed in the morning sunlight, and new flowers lined the walkways. Volunteers had worked tirelessly, turning the once-threatened building into a beacon of hope. Today was the grand reopening, and the parking lot buzzed with excitement as families gathered under clear blue skies. Inside the center's main hall, Eli Ward adjusted his tie in a mirror, his fingers trembling slightly. He wasn't used to wearing formal clothes, preferring his usual work attire of jeans and a worn button-down. But today was special. Maddie appeared beside him, wearing a yellow sundress and carrying something hidden behind her back. "You look handsome, Daddy," she said, beaming at his reflection. Eli smiled, his nervousness easing at his daughter's presence. "Thank you, sweetheart. Have you seen Carter?" "Right here," Carter Langford called from the doorway. He wore a simple suit without a tie, looking more comfortable than he ever had in his expensive corporate attire. "The crowd's getting bigger out there. I think half the town showed up." Eli nodded, taking a deep breath. "Never thought I'd see this day. When they first put up that demolition fence—" "Let's not think about that," Carter interrupted gently. "Today's about new beginnings." Maddie bounced on her toes, unable to contain her excitement any longer. "Uncle Carter, I made something for you." She pulled a handmade bracelet from behind her back, the words, "Real Heroes Save Hearts," carefully written in her neat schoolgirl writing. Carter's eyes widened as she tied it around his wrist. He blinked rapidly, touching the simple string bracelet as if it were made of precious gems. "Maddie, this is perfect." Outside, the crowd's murmur grew louder. Through the window, they could see veterans, families, and community members filling the rows of chairs. American flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, and a large ribbon stretched across the main entrance waited to be cut. "It's time," Eli said softly. They walked together to the podium set up on the front steps. The audience quieted as Eli stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite his nervousness. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "When I first came home from service, I was lost. Many of us were. But this center became more than just a building. It became our anchor. Here, we found purpose. We found family." He paused, looking at Carter. "We learned that faith isn't just about believing in something bigger than ourselves. It's about believing in second chances, in the power of brotherhood, in the strength of community." Eli's voice grew stronger as he continued. 2 weeks ago, this place was scheduled for demolition. But today, it stands as proof that when we stand together, miracles happen. Sometimes they come from unexpected places. He smiled at Carter. "Sometimes they come wearing expensive suits and attitude problems." The crowd chuckled, and Carter shook his head, grinning. When it was Carter's turn to speak, he stood straighter, but his voice was humble. "I came here thinking I knew what leadership meant. I thought it was about power, about making decisions from above. But you, all of you, taught me that real leadership is about service. It's about listening. It's about standing with people, not above them." He touched the bracelet on his wrist. "A very wise young lady once asked me if people deserve second chances. The answer is yes, but those chances aren't just given. They're earned through actions, through change, through putting others first." The crowd applauded as Carter, Eli, and Maddie moved to the ribbon. Someone handed them a large pair of ceremonial scissors. Maddie stood between the two men, her small hands joining theirs on the scissors handles. "Ready?" Eli asked, looking at his newfound family. "Ready," Carter and Maddie answered in unison. The ribbon fell away in a clean cut, and cheers erupted from the crowd. As people began to move toward the entrance, Carter leaned close to Eli. "Your call sign wasn't Sparrow for nothing," he whispered, remembering how Eli's calm strength had guided them all through the crisis. Eli's eyes softened with understanding. "And you weren't meant to lose your way forever." Together, they walked through the doors, Maddie between them holding both their hands. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, bathing them in warm light as they entered the center, not just as friends or partners, but as family and spirit, bound by something stronger than blood. The crowd followed them inside, their voices filled with joy and hope. But for that moment, the three of them moved in their own pocket of peaceful silence, each step taking them further into their shared future. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Ward, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.